This morning, without thinking about it, you picked up your toothbrush and scrubbed your teeth. The tiny bristles felt soft, unremarkable, ordinary. Before 1938, those bristles would have been pig hair. Hair from the backs of hogs raised in cold climates, where animals grew stiffer bristles. Bundled into tufts, set into a bone or wooden handle, that was the dental tool of an entire civilization for centuries. The hair held water. Bacteria grew in it. It went limp. The thing that replaced it did not come from a dentist or a toothbrush factory. It came from chemists in Delaware who were not thinking about anyone's teeth. They were chasing a question about giant molecules, and what they found turned out to matter far beyond the bathroom. Most people have heard the word nylon their whole lives without once stopping to ask where it came from. Let's get into it right here on Small Things. Why a thread can be stronger than steel. Before the story makes sense, one thing about nylon needs to be understood. Nylon's strength does not come from what it is made of. It comes from how it is arranged. Picture a string of beads. One bead on its own is just a bead. But connect millions of beads into a single long chain and stretch that chain tight, and you have something that behaves very differently from a loose pile. Scientists call those long molecular chains polymers, and nylon is one of them. When a nylon thread is pulled tight while cooling, all of those chains straighten out and align parallel to each other. The more chains lying neatly together, the harder the material is to break. Strength comes from order, not from anything magical about the material itself. The hallway where it all started. It did not begin as a product. In 1928, DuPont hired a young chemist named Wallace Carothers with an unusual instruction: study whatever you are most curious about and see what happens. No target, no deadline, no commercial goal. At a time when most industrial research was aimed directly at something to sell, this was strange enough to raise eyebrows inside the company. Carothers was curious about a question many scientists of the era considered settled in the wrong direction. He believed molecules could be joined into chains far longer than anyone had managed before. The prevailing view was that molecules of significant length were structurally impossible. Carothers thought the prevailing view was wrong, and he set about proving it with quiet, methodical stubbornness. He gathered a team. They worked through combinations of chemicals, connecting small molecules into longer and longer structures, checking whether the chains would hold. Then one afternoon in 1930, while Carothers was away from the lab, a young chemist on the team named Julian Hill dipped a glass rod into a gooey batch of experimental material in a flask and pulled it upward. The material stretched into a thin, shimmering thread instead of breaking. Hill found this delightful. He called a few colleagues over. Then, in what is possibly the most consequential act of hallway mischief in industrial history, they took the thread and ran down the corridor with it, stretching it longer and longer as they went. Something unexpected happened as the thread was pulled and cooled simultaneously. Instead of weakening, it became tougher. The molecular chains, under the tension, aligned themselves along the length of the thread, and that order made it strong. The same principle described in the previous section had just been discovered accidentally by people running down a corridor because something stretched and did not break. Nobody in that hallway was trying to replace pig hair. They were not thinking about stockings or parachutes. They were running because it was interesting, and that is sometimes how the world changes. Carothers spent the next several years refining the formula. On February 28, 1935, a member of the team produced the material that would become known as nylon. The name was invented by DuPont, carrying no chemical meaning, designed simply to be easy to say and remember. It succeeded on both counts. Two liquids, one border, one thread. The way nylon is actually made is one of those processes that sounds too elegant to be real. Take two liquids that refuse to mix with each other, the way oil refuses to mix with water, and pour them carefully into the same container. They settle into two separate layers, one sitting on top of the other. Each holds one of the two molecular ingredients of nylon. Left alone, the layers float there doing nothing. But right at the boundary between them, exactly at that thin surface where one liquid meets the other, the molecules begin to join hands. They link into chains, and as they do, they form a film of nylon right at the interface. Lower a pair of tweezers to that film and pull upward, and a thread of nylon comes with it. Every time you remove the film, a fresh border is exposed between the two liquids, and new nylon forms there immediately. You can draw an essentially continuous thread in this way, hand over hand, for as long as the chemicals last. Chemists call this the nylon rope trick, and watching it for the first time tends to produce a silence, because the thing appearing out of thin air looks like it should not be possible. The thread that emerges is not solid. It is a thin tube, sometimes holding a small amount of liquid inside. You are, quite literally, pulling a new material into existence out of the meeting point between two things that would otherwise never interact. In industrial production, the same chemistry runs at a larger scale under heat and pressure. The ingredients are combined, pushed through tiny holes, and the emerging filaments are stretched under tension so the molecular chains align along the length of the thread, locking in the same strength that Julian Hill discovered by accident when he and his colleagues ran down a hallway in Delaware with a thread of something nobody had ever seen before. The factory and the hallway are doing the same thing, just with very different levels of intention. Nylon did not win. It was called in. Most people assume nylon replaced silk stockings because it was cheaper and more durable, and that women preferred it once they tried it. That is only partly true, and it misses the more interesting part of the story. Nylon stockings went on sale for the first time on May 15, 1940. The public response was extraordinary. Nearly 4 million pairs sold within the first few days. Within the year, Americans bought over 60 million pairs. Women lined up outside shops early in the morning. The word nylon became so associated with stockings that many people still call them nylons today, without realizing they are using a brand of plastic as a common noun. But the competition between nylon and silk lasted less than 2 years before it became irrelevant. When the United States entered World War II, the government needed silk for gunpowder bags, which held propellant charges in artillery shells and had to burn completely on firing. The supply from Japan was cut off. Stocking production stopped almost immediately. Women who had discovered nylon 6 months earlier now could not buy it for any price. Nylon filled the military gap, and in doing so proved it could do things nobody in a stocking factory had imagined. Parachutes, ropes, tents, aircraft tires. Consumer preference had nothing to do with it. The war made the decision, and nylon spent 4 years demonstrating that the thread from a Delaware lab was not just useful, but essential. From the bathroom to the battlefield, today you will find nylon in 2 places that could not seem more different from each other or from the stockings that first made it famous. A parachute canopy needs to slow a falling human body from terminal velocity to a survivable landing speed. It needs to be light enough to pack into a backpack and strong enough not to tear when it snaps open under enormous force. The same molecular structure that Julian Hill stretched down a corridor in 1930 is what makes a military parachute open reliably. A material invented to make women's legs look elegant caught soldiers falling from the sky within a decade of its creation. the seatbelt and airbag in your car tell a quieter version of the same story. A seatbelt must hold a human body in place during a crash, generating forces several times the weight of the person it restrains. An airbag must inflate in 30 milliseconds, deploy with enough force to stop a head before it hits a dashboard, and do it gently enough not to injure the person it is protecting. Both depend on nylon. The webbing in the belt for its tensile strength, the bag of the airbag for its ability to hold shape in the fraction of a second that matters. The thread in the bathroom cabinet is related to the thread that absorbs the force of a collision. Most people who buckle their seatbelt in the morning have already touched nylon twice before they reach the car. The thread you forgot was there. So, how did nylon go from a laboratory experiment to a thread inside everything? Think about that toothbrush again. The bristles this morning. Wallace Carothers died in 1937 at 41 years old, 1 year before nylon went into commercial production. He never saw Nylon Day, never saw the queues outside shops, never saw a parachute open or a seatbelt hold. Nylon is not just a synthetic fiber. It is a reminder that some of the biggest changes in human life do not arrive as giant machines, but as tiny materials we stop noticing because they become part of everything. The thread is so familiar now that we brush our teeth with it, wear it, drive inside it, and fall from the sky held by it, without ever quite registering where it came from. If this changed the way you think about the ordinary things you touch every day, let us know in the comments what you want us to explore next. We might make it our next episode. Thanks for watching. History often hides in the smallest details.